The titer was falling, and titers of the Sable strain did not fall. Sethais watched the number drop through another decimal place on the containment panel and did not at first believe the panel. Sable rose. That was the whole point of it, the axiom the Directorate had spent 400 cycles proving in the wet tissue of 40 cataloged species. You introduced the strain, and it climbed. It climbed through blood and lymph and the folded walls of a lung, reading the host as it went, staying one adaptation ahead of whatever the host's body tried to raise against it, until the body ran out of ideas and the strain owned the machinery. It did not fall. It had never once, in the entire recorded history of the 9th Concordance Program, fallen. On the panel it was falling. "Instrument," Overseer Draw said, without looking up from her own readouts across the observation gallery. Her mantle had gone the flat gray of certainty, the color the senior staff wore when a junior analyst had made a junior analyst's mistake. "Recalibrate the assay, Sethais. You have contaminated the draw with buffer." Sethais had not contaminated the draw with buffer. Sethais had pulled the sample himself, from the third indwelling line, with the care of someone who understood that every fluid in the station was either a weapon or a thing that could carry one. But he inclined his head, because that was what a provisional analyst did when an overseer told him the floor was not falling out from under the program, and he ran the assay again. The number came back lower. Below him, through the thick sweep of the containment glass, the subject sat on the edge of the cradle they had bolted to the cell floor and watched the machines watch her. She was small. That was the first thing the intake report had flagged, and the first thing that had made Draw dismiss her, a wet species biped, soft-shelled, no carapace, no venom sac, no visible armament of any kind, standing barely to the height of a semi's second thoracic segment. The humans in the border seizure had come off their crippled hauler with their hands open and their voices low, and this one had come quietest of all. She had a healing split above one brow from where the boarding crew had put her against a bulkhead. She had dirt worked into the creases of her knuckles that the decontamination cycle had not entirely taken. She wore the station's issue containment shift, gray, too large, and she wore it the way a person wears clothes they intend to leave in. Her designation in the log was Subject Umber-94. Her name, which she had given once, flatly, to the intake clerk and never again, was Wren Calder. "Titer at 0.4 of introduction baseline," Sethais said. His voice came out level. He was proud of that later when there was very little else to be proud of. "Falling." "Then the strain is banking," said physician-architect Vess from the archway. Nobody had heard the old one come in. Vess had built Sable, had spent a lifetime folding it out of the only molecular toolkit the Semeri had ever trusted, their own, and Vess moved through the station like weather, present before you registered the change in pressure. It reads the host, it goes quiet, it maps the immune landscape, and it climbs when it has finished mapping. A falling titer in the first day is a strain that has found something worth studying. Nothing more. That was a comfortable thing to say, and half the gallery took the comfort. Sethais noticed that Vess did not sit down. He looked back at the subject. She had turned her head, following the small mechanical noise of the assay carousel spinning up for its third run, and for a moment her eyes tracked across the glass to where he stood and past him, and she went back to studying the ceiling of her cell with the mild, unhurried attention of a person waiting out a delay in a transit lounge. Her vitals scrolled beside the falling titer. Core temperature elevated, 3 degrees over the human baseline the intake team had logged. Respiration slightly quick, pulse steady. All of it exactly what the strain should produce in the first day, a wet body lighting up its crude defensive fires while Sable moved underneath them, unbothered, learning. Except that Sable was not climbing, Sable was going down. "Increase the sampling interval," Vess said. "Every quarter shift. I want the curve, not the number." Sethais logged the order and did not say what he was thinking, which was that they already had enough of the curve to see its shape, and its shape was wrong. The Semeri had not been sick in a very long time. This was the thing outsiders never understood about them, the thing that sat under every choice the Directorate had ever made, including the choice to build Sable and the choice to test it on captives instead of on themselves. Deep in the species' history, before the conquered, before the long climb off their birthworld, the Semeri had done to their own biology what no other catalogued people had dared. They had looked at the machinery of infection, the invasion, the fever, the slow negotiation between a body and the things that wanted to live inside it, and they had found it intolerable, unclean, a design flaw. And they had spent an age and an ocean of dead ancestors editing it out of themselves, closing the doors one by one, sterilizing their own line until a modern Semeri body was a sealed and self-contained thing that no pathogen could open, because they had thrown away the locks entirely and welded the frames shut. They no longer had immune systems in any sense a wet species would recognize. They did not need them. They lived in clean air behind clean walls, and they had not buried anyone to a fever in longer than most species had existed. It made them the perfect people to build a weapon out of disease, because they had no fear of it turning in their hands. And it made the wet worlds their perfect proving grounds, because a wet body still ran the old ugly machinery, still fought, still burned, still lost, and a wet body could be catalogued, graded, and filed by exactly how it lost. Earth had been catalogued. It sat in the registry as an Umber-class world, which meant a death world, which meant a place where the gravity was heavy and the biosphere was armed, and the local life spent every waking moment trying to kill every other piece of local life, and where the dominant species had climbed to the top of that grinder and stayed there. The survey note attached to the human file was 400 cycles old and had been written by someone who never expected it to matter. Wet cinder, it said. High competition biosphere. Dominant biped displays extreme injury tolerance and anomalous immune plasticity. Not recommended for direct contact. Recommended for standoff observation. Anomalous immune plasticity. Sethais had read the phrase in the file that morning, over the ration paste he had not finished, and thought nothing of it, because a phrase written by a dead surveyor 400 cycles ago did not stand up against a strain that had beaten 40 species in a row. Now he read it again on his own display, where he had pulled the file to check the intake baselines, and he did not like the way it sat next to the falling number. Overseer, he said, the 400 cycle note, on the human line, it flags immune plasticity. Every wet species flags something, Draw said. They flag it and then they die of Sable and the flag goes in the appendix. Run the assay, analyst. Stop reading the appendix. He ran the assay, titer at 0.31 of baseline, falling. In the cell, Ren Calder lay back on the cradle, folded one arm behind her head, and closed her eyes, as though the whole affair had finally become boring enough to sleep through. By the end of the first day, 3 things had happened that the Directorate had procedures for, and one that it did not. The first was the fever. The subject's core temperature climbed to a level that would have cooked a Semeri's proteins in an hour, and would have, by every model in the archive, marked the beginning of a wet host's collapse, the strain finally coming up out of its mapping phase and setting the body alight from the inside. The gallery watched the number rise with something close to relief, because a rising fever was a thing the models knew, and a body burning was a body losing. Draw's mantle warmed toward the confident gray again. There, she said. There it is, the bank is over. Log the onset. Sethais logged the onset. Then he logged, 4 hours later, the thing the models did not have a procedure for, which was that the fever broke. It did not break the way a wet host's fever broke at the end, in the guttering collapse of a body that had spent itself and lost. The subject's temperature came down in a smooth, governed curve, the way a system comes down when something has decided the emergency is over and is standing the crew down. She slept through most of it. When she woke, she asked the intake clerk, over the cell's audio channel, for water and drank it and asked for more. The second thing was the countertiter. Sethais had been sampling the strain in her blood and watching it fall. Now he began sampling the other side of the ledger, the host's own defensive output, the antibodies and cytokines and the whole improvised arsenal a wet body threw at an invader, and he found that it was not merely rising. It was rising with structure. It was not the panicked scattershot flailing the models described, a body throwing everything at the wall. It was targeted. It was narrow. It was, each time he sampled it, narrower and more exactly shaped to the strain than the sample before, as though something in her was not fighting Sable so much as reading it, the way Sable had been built to read its hosts, and reading it faster. "That is the plasticity note," Vess said quietly, at his shoulder, and Sethai startled because he had not heard the architect approach, and because the architect's mantle had gone a color Sethais had never seen a senior Semeri wear, not the gray of certainty. A pale, mottled, uneven wash, the color of a still pond when something moves under it. "It is adapting," Sethai said. "They all adapt," Vess said. "Sable is built for adaptation. Sable adapts faster than any host can follow, that is the axiom." The old one watched the countertiter climb its structured climb. "Analyst, pull the last 6 draws and give me the rate, not the strain's rate, the host's." Sethais pulled them. He put the 2 rates side by side on the display, Sable's rate of adaptation, the fabled rate, the rate that had beaten 40 worlds and the humans. The humans was steeper. Not by much. Not yet. But the 2 curves ran up the display together, and the wet one, the soft-shelled one, the one that belonged to the small, dirty biped asleep in the cradle, was pulling ahead. "That is a plotting error," Draw said, when Vess put the 2 curves on the gallery's main plate without a word. "Analyst, you have inverted the axes." "I have not inverted the axes, Overseer." "Then you have mislabeled the traces." "I have not mislabeled the traces." Draw came down off her station and stood in front of the main plate with her 4 eyes fixed on it, and her mantle cycling through colors Sethais could not name. And for a long moment she said nothing at all, and the gallery was very quiet, and behind the glass the subject slept. The third thing the Directorate had a procedure for was the escalation of dose. When a strain underperformed, which had happened exactly twice in program history, both times traced to a manufacturing fault in the medium, the protocol was to reintroduce at a higher load, from a fresh lot, with a witness chain of custody, and to document the correction. Draw ordered it that night. A dose 10 times the first, drawn from a sealed reference vial that Vess had personally sequenced, carried into the cell's delivery port by 2 wardens in full pressure carriage, and pushed into the 3rd line while the subject watched the needle go in with the same mild attention she gave everything else. "You could tell me what it is," she said to the wardens, in the flat trade tongue the humans used on the border. Her voice over the channel was low and even and entirely without heat. "I'd rather know what I'm carrying." The wardens did not answer. They were not permitted to answer. They finished the delivery and withdrew and sealed the port, and the gallery settled in to watch a strain 10 times stronger do what the first dose had failed to do. It failed faster. That was the 4th thing, the thing there was no procedure for. The 10 times dose entered a body that had already spent a day reading the first dose, and the body did not have to start over. It recognized the tool. Sethais watched the second titer spike on introduction, the way any titer spiked when you put 10 times the load into a host. And then he watched it fall, not over a day this time, but over a half shift, dropping through the decimal places faster than the carousel could keep up, while the countertiter on the other side of the ledger came up to meet it in that same narrow, structured, deliberate climb, sharper than before, because the body had done this once already and had kept what it learned. "It kept the adaptation," Sethai said. He heard how his own voice sounded and could not fix it. "Overseer, from the first dose, it didn't clear the response and start over. It kept it and it built the second one on top." "Wet bodies do not do that," Draw said. "This one is doing that." Wet bodies do not do that. She said it again, slower, as if the slowness would make it true. The immune response is a fire. You put out the fire is out. It does not remember the shape of the last fire. It does not build. Overseer, Vess said from the archway, in the voice of an architect who has watched a load he calculated for a lifetime settle onto a beam, and heard the beam begin, very quietly, to sing. This one builds. In the cell, Wren Calder sat up on the cradle, rolled her shoulder where the fresh line pulled, and looked through the glass at the gallery full of tall gray shapes watching her. And for the first time since intake, she smiled, not wide, not warm, barely a change in the set of her mouth, the expression of a person who has just felt something click into place that the people watching her have not felt yet. Whatever this is, she said, over the channel to no one and to all of them, it's a good teacher. Nobody in the gallery answered her. Sethais, who was the only one still looking at the countertiter instead of at the smile, watched the human's adaptation rate tick upward one more increment, pass Sable's and stay there. The Directorate had a word for a strain that lost. The word was defective, and it carried a manufacturing report and a review of the medium, and sometimes a quiet retirement for whoever had signed the lot. The Directorate had no word at all for a strain that lost to the host and made the host stronger, because in 400 cycles no host had ever won, and a thing that has never happened does not get a word until it happens, and by then it is usually too late to say it calmly. Sethais spent the second day building a case out of numbers, because numbers were the only thing in the station that Draw could not accuse of panicking. He pulled every draw from the first 2 doses and laid the strain's behavior out end to end, and what he saw when he laid it out was not a strain that had failed. It was a strain that had been studied. Sable went into the human and did exactly what Sable did. It read the host, it mapped the immune terrain, it began to fold copies of itself keyed to the weaknesses it found. That was the genius of it, Vess's lifework, the reason it had beaten 40 worlds. It did not fight the host's defenses, it went around them, faster than the host could raise new ones. Against a wet body that adapted at the ordinary wet rate, Sable was always one full step ahead forever, and the step never closed. Against this body, the step closed on the first day and inverted on the second. And when it inverted, when the human's defenses came up level with Sable and then a hair past it, something happened that Sethais had no framework for and would spend the rest of his life trying to build one for. The human's immune system did not simply kill the strain, it disassembled it. It took Sable apart the way a good mechanic takes apart a tool that has been used against him, not smashing it, studying it, learning what each folded piece was for, and then it began, in the narrow structured chemistry of the countertiter, to keep the pieces. She is stripping it for parts, Sethais said. He had not meant to say it to Vess. He had meant to say it to his own log, quietly, the way an analyst talks himself through a thing that frightens him. But Vess was there at his shoulder, as Vess now always was, and Vess heard it, and Vess did not correct him. Yes, the architect said, that is what I am watching also. That is not possible. The host does not have the machinery to read the strain. Reading is what the strain does. Reading is what we built into it. The host burns, the host does not read. This host reads. Vess folded 2 of the long gray limbs across the mantle in the posture the old ones used for grief, and Sethais understood only later that grief was what it was, grief for a lifework, arriving early ahead of the disaster it foretold. Analyst. When a wet species evolves on a quiet world, its immune system is a fire brigade. It has time. A threat comes once a generation, and the body raises a defense and files it and forgets it. When a species evolves on an Umber world. It has no time, Sethais said. It has no time. Every hour of every day is another thing trying to open its cells. So its immune system does not evolve to put out one fire and forget. It evolves to remember every fire it has ever seen and to teach itself the next one before the next one arrives. It evolves to do, in a body, in real time, the thing we spent 400 cycles building a strain to do. It evolves to read. Vess turned the pale, mottled mantle toward the glass, toward the small, sleeping shape in the cradle. We did not release our strongest infection into a host, Sethai's. We released it into the one kind of host in the catalog that was built, over an age of that ugly, heavy world, to take an infection apart and keep the good pieces. We handed a master's tools to a species that survives by stealing tools. Below them, Ren Calder woke and asked for water, and this time the intake clerk, on Dra's standing order, did not answer, and she looked up at the silent glass for a moment, and then simply got up and drank from the cell's own recycled tap without complaint. And Sethais felt something cold move through the cavity where his species kept the organ that other species called a heart. They tried to kill the strain in her. That was the third-day protocol, and it was a good protocol, and it had never failed, because they had built the counteragent alongside the weapon the way any careful people build the antidote next to the poison. The counteragent was a molecular key, folded to fit Sable's active core and jam it, and in every prior test it had cleared a host of the strain within a shift, which was academically useful because it let the program run a host more than once before the host expired. They had never needed it to save a host. They needed it now to erase the evidence of the thing the host was doing, and Dra ordered it with the brisk relief of someone reaching for a tool she trusts. It did not work. Sethais watched the counteragent go into the third line and watched it circulate and watched it find nothing to jam, because there was very little intact Sable left in her to jam. She had already taken most of it apart, and what was left? The strain had folded a shield around, a shield that had not existed in any prior test, a shield whose structure, when Sethais sequenced it, matched nothing in Vess's design archive and everything in the human's countertiter. The strain is hiding behind her chemistry, he said. The counteragent can't reach it. He stopped, because the next word was going to be protecting, and protecting a weapon that had been put into her to kill her did not make sense until it did. She's not protecting herself from the strain anymore, Overseer. She's protecting the strain, she's keeping it, she's found a use for it. Log it as a counteragent resistance event, Dra said. Her mantle had gone a gray Sethais had not seen on her, a thin, brittle gray like frost. Resistance is a known phenomenon. We will note the resistance and we will. There is no resistance in the archive, Vess said. There has never been counteragent resistance. The counteragent has never once failed in 400 cycles. You are reaching for a word for this because you would rather have the wrong word than no word. The architect said it without cruelty, almost gently, the way the oldest of them said the hardest things. There is no word yet, Overseer. That is what should frighten you. We are early enough that there is still no word. By the fourth day there was a word, and the word was Ren Calder's, because she gave it to them, and it was the only word any of them would use afterward when they were honest. She had asked again over the channel what she was carrying. She asked it the way she asked for water, without heat, a person requesting a fact she felt entitled to. And on the fourth day, for reasons Dra never entered in the log, the Overseer answered her, perhaps to frighten her, perhaps because a scientist who cannot make her instruments confess will sometimes try to make the subject confess instead. It is the strongest infection our people have ever built, Dra said, over the channel in the trade tongue, standing at the gallery glass and looking down at the small human as if the size of the words might finally do what the strain had failed to do. 40 species have received it. 40 species have died of it. You have received it twice, at 10 times the load, and you are still speaking to me. I want you to understand what that means. It means your body is doing something my people spent 400 cycles proving was impossible. And when we understand what it is doing, we will build the next strain out of it, and no world will be able to answer that one, including yours. Ren Calder listened to all of it with her head tilted and her hands loose on her knees. When Dra finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she nodded slowly, the way a person nods when they have finally been handed the last piece of a thing they had mostly figured out on their own. "So it teaches the body to fight," she said. "That's the trick. It doesn't just poison you, it makes your body run the whole race to keep up. Reads you, gets ahead, you push, it pushes." She turned the split-browed side of her face toward the glass. "You built a thing to teach a body how to fight the smartest disease there is, and then you put it in me." "In 40 of you," Dra said. "You are the 4th from your world. The other 3 are in cold storage on the sublevel." Something changed in the human's face then. For the first time, not heat, not anger, nothing the gallery had a model for, but a small settling, a door quietly closing somewhere behind her eyes. She looked at the glass a moment longer. Then she lay back on the cradle and folded her arm behind her head and said, to the ceiling, in the same flat, even voice she used for everything, "Then you should have kept it in the vial." Sethais, standing at his station with the countertiter scrolling beside him, saw the exact instant she said it that the number changed its behavior. Up until the 4th day, the human's defensive output had been narrow and inward. Everything she built to take Sable apart and keep it from killing her. It was a closed loop, a body defending a body. Now, in the hours after Dra told her what she carried and that 3 of her people were in cold storage below, the output stopped being purely inward. Sethais began to find in the draws molecules that were not defensive at all. They were built out of Sable's own stolen toolkit, the reading machinery, the folding machinery, the parts her body had stripped and kept, and they were not shaped to protect her from anything. They were shaped to be given away. He did not understand it that day. He logged it as anomalous secretory activity and flagged it for Vess and did not sleep. And in the dark of his quarters, he ran the shapes against the archive again and again. And every time the answer came back the same, and every time he refused it, because the answer was that the human's body had finished the first task, surviving, and had moved on to a second task, and the second task was manufacture. She was not just beating the weapon. She was building one. Vess found him before the shift, in the corridor outside the assay bay, and the architect's mantle was the pond color again, the moving under the surface color, and Vess said without preamble, "You saw the secretory shapes." "I saw them." "Tell me what they are for. You have had all night." "Tell me, so that I do not have to be the one who says it first." Sethais looked at the old one who had built the strongest infection the Semeri had ever made, and who now stood in a clean corridor on a clean station, full of a clean species that had thrown away its own defenses an age ago. And he understood all at once the shape of the thing they were standing inside of. "They're keyed to us," he said. "The shapes. She built the reading machinery to survive Sable, and Sable is made of our chemistry, our folds, the only toolkit we ever trusted. So everything she learned about us. And now she's making something out of it, and it isn't shaped to fit her." He made himself say the rest of it. "It's shaped to fit a body with no immune system at all. It's shaped to fit the one kind of body in the catalog that threw away every lock. It's shaped to fit ours." Vess was silent for a long moment. Out beyond the corridor's daylight port, the station turned its bright face toward the system's star, and the light came in clean and white and fell across the 2 of them, the old architect and the young analyst, standing very still in the place where their people had come to be safe from disease forever. "We have not been sick in a very long time," Vess said at last quietly. "We do not remember how." "No," Sethais said. "She is going to teach us." Dra's answer to the corridor and the archive and the 2 curves running up the plate was to order a 3rd dose, and this time she did not reach for a heavier load. She reached for a cleaner one. The reasoning she entered in the log was sound, on its own terms, which was the terrible thing about Dra, that her wrongness always had good reasoning bolted to the front of it. If the first 2 doses had failed, she argued, and the counteragent had failed, then the fault must lie in the strain, not the host, because a host defeating Sable was impossible, and the impossible does not go in a report. Therefore the strain in the reference vials must be degraded. Therefore they would draw from the deepest archive a sealed master lot of sable, sequenced fresh, verified against the original design, a variant folded to be, by every metric Vess had ever built, the most complete expression of the weapon in existence, the masterwork of the masterwork. If that failed, then and only then would Dra entertain the possibility that the problem was not in the vial. Vess did not argue. Sethais expected the architect to argue, and Vess did not, and Sethais understood why when he saw the old one's mantle, because Vess wanted the master lot tested too, for the opposite reason. Dra wanted it to prove the host was ordinary and the strain was faulty. Vess wanted it because Vess had already accepted that the host was not ordinary, and needed to know, before the end came, exactly how not ordinary. Needed to see the strongest thing the species had ever folded go into that small body, and find out what the small body did with it. The way an engineer who has built a dam and heard it sing will go and stand at its foot to learn precisely how it means to fail. They drew the master lot. 2 wardens in full carriage carried it to port 3 and pushed it into the 3rd line, and Wren Calder watched the needle with the same mild attention, and this time she spoke over the channel, and this time, on Dra's standing order, no one answered. "That's a different one," she said, "not a question. That one you're scared of. I can tell by how many of you came to watch." She rolled her shoulder where the line pulled. "It's fine. Send it in. My body's bored. It's been 2 days and you keep giving it the same puzzle a little bigger. This one looks like it might actually be new." It was new. Sethais watched it go in and watched the titer spike higher than either previous dose. The master lot climbing the way Sable was supposed to climb, reading, mapping, folding its keyed copies, and for a few hours the gallery breathed easier because a rising titer was the axiom restored, the world put back on its shelf. Dra's mantle warmed. "There," she said softly the way she always said it. "There. The first lots were degraded. This is Sable as designed. Log the recovery." Sethais did not log the recovery. He logged, 4 hours later, the master lot beginning to fall. It fell differently than the first 2. The first 2 had fallen against a body that was learning from scratch. The master lot fell against a body that had already spent 2 days learning Sable's grammar, and so it did not get the slow first-day study, the courteous mapping. It got taken apart on contact by a system that recognized the toolkit, that had seen this fold and the other, that treated the most complete expression of the weapon, the way a veteran treats a raw recruit's clever plan, with the tired competence of having watched the plan before, in 100 slightly different uniforms. The countertiter came up to meet it in the narrow, structured climb, sharper than it had ever been, and where the first dose had taken a day to invert and the second a half shift, the master lot inverted in under 2 hours, and then it did not merely fall. It vanished, disassembled, filed, its good pieces kept, and Sethais stood at his station and watched the strongest infection his species had ever built reduced, in a small dirty body on a bolted cradle, to raw material. "The variant is degraded also," Dra said, but she said it to the plate, not to the room, and Sethais heard the thing that had come into her voice, which was that she no longer believed herself. "The variant is your master lot, Overseer," Vess said. "Sequence this shift from the deepest archive under my own witness. There is no degradation. There is a host that learned Sable 2 days ago and did not forget it, and every dose you send now, she opens faster than the last because she keeps everything. You are not testing whether the strain works. You have tested that 3 times. You are teaching her the strain, dose by dose, from every angle in the archive, and she is thanking you for the tuition." The architect turned the pond-colored mantle toward the glass. "Send her the whole library, Overseer, and she will know Sable better than I do by the end of the week. I have spent a lifetime with it. She has spent 3 days. I would stop feeding the student before the student graduates." Dra did not stop. Not then, because she was still 1 revelation short of stopping, and the revelation she was short of was the one about what the student intended to do with the education. She ordered the sampling continued, and the master lot kinetics run in full, and the whole thing entered under a review flag, and she went to her quarters, and ScienceFiction stayed at his station through the off shift, because someone had to watch the instruments, and because he had stopped being able to sleep. In the small hours, with the gallery empty and the station turned dark side to the star, and only the cell's own light burning, Wren Calder spoke over the channel to a room she had every reason to think was empty. "I know somebody's still up there," she said. "The instruments don't run themselves, and your people don't trust me alone with a heartbeat monitor." She was lying back on the cradle, one arm behind her head, watching the ceiling. "You don't have to answer. Your boss told you not to, and you strike me as somebody who does what he's told even when he stopped believing it. That's most people. No shame in it." A pause. "I just want to say one thing to whoever's listening, for the log, since you people love a log. 3 days ago I was cargo. You had me down as a wet animal that would die in a day, and you put your worst thing in me to watch it happen, and you were so sure that you didn't even bother lying to me about it. The overseer told me straight out, 40 species, 40 deaths, and you're the 41st. That's how sure you were." Her voice did not rise. It never rose. "And now it's the middle of your night and somebody's sitting up there alone watching my heartbeat because it's the most frightening number on this station. You did that, not me. I've just been lying here being cargo. You turned the cargo into the most dangerous thing on the ring by refusing to believe there was any danger in it. That's the whole story of how your kind meets my kind, I think. You'll do it again somewhere else with somebody else because you can't help it, and it'll go the same way because we can't help it either." She closed her eyes. "Get some sleep, whoever you are. The number's not going to change tonight. I'm calm. I'm always calm. That's the part you should be writing down." ScienceFiction did not answer her, but he wrote it down. He wrote all of it down, word for word, in the log that was quietly becoming the only honest document on the station, and at the bottom of it, in the place where an analyst noted his own assessment, he wrote the first thing he had ever written that Dra would have called insubordination, and Vess would have called the beginning of sense. "The host is not defective and the strain is not degraded. The host is winning. We should stop giving it reasons to win harder." Then he sat in the dark and watched the calmest number on the station hold steady, exactly as its owner had promised. And he did not sleep. And somewhere below him, the small dirty body on the bolted cradle went on taking the strongest weapon his people had ever built and quietly, patiently, keeping the pieces it liked. Dra did not accept the shape of the thing standing inside the station, because accepting it would have required her to accept that she had ordered it built. So she did what people in charge do when the numbers stop obeying them. She reclassified the numbers. She had the countertiter data pulled from the shared plate and moved to a sealed review. She had the secretory shapes relabeled in the log from anomalous manufacture to host debris. "The wreckage of a body breaking down," she said, "not the product of a body building." She had the sampling interval widened so that the curves grew coarse and lost their terrible smoothness and could, if you squinted at the coarse version, be argued to be noise. And she had a directive drafted for the oversight relay, 400 cycles of institutional language folded around a single load-bearing sentence. Subject Umber-class exhibits atypical strain kinetics under investigation. No containment concern. No containment concern. ScienceFiction read that sentence over Dra's shoulder and felt the cold thing move in him again, because it was, on the day she wrote it, still technically true, and it would not be true for very much longer, and she had chosen the last day it could be written and written it. "You disagree, analyst." She had not turned around. Her mantle was the brittle frost gray. "I think the shapes are not debris, overseer." "I know you do. You have thought so loudly for 3 days. She turned then, all 4 eyes on him, and she was not unkind, which was worse. "Let me tell you what I know that you do not. I know what happens to a station that sends up a containment concern. I know that the relay reaches the Directorate in 9 days and a quarantine fleet reaches us in 20, and I know that the quarantine protocol for a novel agent on a manned array is not to study it. It is to sterilize the array, everything on it. The subject, the strain, the samples, the archive, and the staff. Us ScienceFi's. You and me and Vess and every warden and clerk on this ring. That is the mercy the Directorate shows to a station that admits it has lost control of a pathogen. So before you ask me again to write the word containment, I want you to understand that you are asking me to sign the order that kills everyone you have ever worked with, on the strength of a curve you have not yet proven, about a subject who is still, 4 days in, alive and rude. ScienceFi's had no answer to that. It was the first honest thing she had said since the titer began to fall, and it was honest in the specific way of a person explaining exactly why they intend to do the wrong thing. Widen the interval, she said. Log the shapes as debris. Give me 9 more days of clean numbers and I will give you a subject we can study at leisure on our terms with the Directorate none the wiser. That is not cowardice, analyst. That is command. She might even have gotten her 9 days, if the seal on delivery port 3 had held. It was a small thing, the kind of small thing that a station full of people who had not been sick in an age had stopped believing could matter. Port 3 was where the wardens pushed the doses in and drew the samples out, a double-gasketed sleeve rated for agents far worse than anything a wet body could brew, inspected on a schedule, trusted. But it had cycled more times in 4 days than it usually cycled in a quarter, because ScienceFi's was drawing samples on the widened interval, and Dra was still, quietly, ordering off-log draws of her own to feed the sealed review, and somewhere in the extra cycling a gasket that should have been replaced 2 shifts ago took a hairline set, and on the 4th night it wept. It wept a volume of atmosphere smaller than a breath. It wept it into the service space behind the cell wall, where a maintenance tech of House Allen named Farron was replacing a light element on a work order, without pressure carriage, because the service space behind a sealed cell was a clean space, had always been a clean space, was a space where a seminary could work bare-membraned in perfect safety, because the seminary did not get sick. Farron finished the light element and logged the work order closed and went off shift, and slept 8 hours in the crew ring and ate a meal in the mess with 40 other staff, and stood close to 3 of them in the transit tube and touched the same rail they touched, and was, in every one of those hours, entirely without symptoms, because the thing Wren Calder's body had built did not announce itself the way a wet infection announced itself. It did not raise a fever in a seminary. A seminary had no fever to raise. It simply went in, through the doors that had been welded shut an age ago and had never needed guards because they were welded shut, and it began, very patiently, to do the one thing the seminary body had no answer for, because the seminary body had thrown away the answer. ScienceFi's found the first sign of it in the water. The station reclaimed everything, every station did, and the reclamation assays ran continuously, checking the recycled water for the ordinary spectrum of trouble, and on the 5th day one of the assays flagged a protein where no protein should be. ScienceFi's almost dismissed it. It was a small signal, at the edge of the noise, in a water line that served the crew ring and not the containment tier, physically separated from the cell by 3 sealed decks. There was no path for anything in the cell to reach that line. He almost dismissed it, and then he ran the protein against the archive out of the same reflex that had made him run the 400-cycle note, and the archive gave him back a match, and the match was the secretory shape. The thing Wren Calder's body had built, the thing shaped to fit a body with no locks, and it was in the crew water, 3 sealed decks away from the only place it could have come from. He sat very still for a moment. Then he pulled the personnel movement log, and the maintenance work orders and the Port 3 inspection record, and he laid them end to end the way he had laid the strain's behavior end to end, and the path assembled itself in front of him, small and stupid and complete. A wept gasket, a bare membrane tech, an 8-hour sleep, a shared meal, a shared rail, a crew ring, a water line. Farron of House Allen had been carrying it for a day and had touched, by the movement log, 31 other members of staff. ScienceFi's did not go to draw first. He went to Vess, because Vess was the only one on the station who would hear the whole sentence before deciding what it meant, and he found the architect in the archive, alone, with the whole design history of Sable open on the plates around them like the walls of a tomb the old one had built for himself, and was only now recognizing. "Port 3 wept," ScienceFiction said. "4 nights ago, a tech worked the service Space Bear. The secretary agent is in the crew water. I have a movement path and 31 contacts, and it is a day old, and none of them have any symptoms because none of them can have symptoms, because we do not." His voice did something it had not done since he was a juvenile, and he stopped and made it stop and finished. "Because we threw away the part that has symptoms." Vess did not move for a long moment. The archive light lay across the old mantle, which had gone past the pond color now to a flat dead gray ScienceFiction had never seen on a living semere, the gray of something that has finished being afraid and has arrived somewhere colder. 31, Vess said. "As of a day ago, it will be more now, the mess, the tube, the rail." ScienceFiction made himself say the arithmetic because someone had to, and Dra would relabel it if he brought it to her first. "Physician, we do not have a counteragent for this. We have a counteragent for Sable. This is not Sable. This is what her body made out of Sable, and it is keyed to us. And there is nothing in the archive that fits it, because nothing like us has ever needed defending before." "No." Vess rose slowly, unfolding the long body up out of the archive chair the way the very old rose, deliberately gathering themselves. "There is one thing in the station that fits it. There is one system on this ring that has ever met this agent and taken it apart and built an answer to it." The dead gray mantle turned toward the door, toward the containment tier, toward the cell. "She has the counteragent. She is the counteragent. Her body solved this a day after we gave her the problem, and it has been solving it ever since, and it is the only thing within 20 days of us that knows how. Dra will not go to her. Dra," Vess said, "is going to have no other door to walk through by the end of this shift. Come, we are going to go and stand in front of the glass and tell the overseer what the water says, and then we are going to watch her try one more time to find a word for it, and fail, and then, at last, we are going to have to do the thing none of us has done in 400 cycles." The architect paused at the archive door. "We are going to have to ask a wet species for help." Dra did not believe the water. She stood in front of the reclamation data with her mantle cycling through the colors of a mind rejecting an input, and she said the things a person in charge says, that the assay was miscalibrated, that the protein was a contaminant off ScienceFiction's own gloves, that a single edge of noise signal 3 decks from containment was not a breach, was not anything, was a junior analyst seeing his own theory in the noise because he wanted so badly to be right that he would burn the station down to prove it. "Then test Farron," Vess said. That stopped her. Vess had not raised the mantle tone, had not moved, had simply laid the tech's name down on the table between them like a stone. Farron of House Allen worked the service space behind Port 3, Bear, on the night the port wept. He is on this ring right now. He is asymptomatic because we are all asymptomatic because we do not have the machinery for symptoms. Draw his blood, overseer. Run it against the secretary shape. If I am wrong, you will have proof for your review and you can retire ScienceFiction for wasting your medium. If I am right. Vess let the sentence stand open because the end of it did not need saying. Dra tested Farron. She did it herself in the sealed review bay with only the 3 of them present, because whatever the result was, she was not ready for the station to see it on her face. The result was the secretary's shape, at a titer that had climbed overnight, in the blood of a semere who felt perfectly well, and would go on feeling perfectly well right up, until the agent finished its patient work on the parts of him that no longer had any way to fight back. The overseer looked at the number for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed, not softened, but emptied. The command timbre drained out of it, leaving something flatter and older underneath. "How long," she said, "for him, for Farron?" "I do not know," Vess said. "No one knows. There is no natural history for this because there has never been a this. In a wet host the strain kills in a day because the wet host fights and loses, and the fighting is what kills it, the fever, the storm. Farron will not fight. His body cannot fight, so it may be slower, it may be much slower. The agent will simply go where it likes and do what it does, and there will be no fever to mark its progress, no storm, no crisis. He will be well, and then one morning he will not be well, and there will be no stage in between where a physician could have stepped in, because we retired the physicians who knew those stages an age ago. Vess folded the grief posture again. That is the thing we did to ourselves, Overseer. We made ourselves a people who cannot get sick, and the price of it, which we never had to pay until now, is that we are also a people who cannot get better. Dra closed 2 of her 4 eyes. It was, Sethais realized, the nearest thing he had ever seen her do to flinching. 31 contacts, she said. As of yesterday, run the movement log forward and it is more. And the only counteragent within 20 days of this ring is in the cell. Is the cell, Vess corrected gently, is a small, rude, wet biped from an Umber world who has spent 5 days taking our strongest infection apart and learning our chemistry better than we know it ourselves, and who, I would remind the Overseer, was told yesterday that 3 of her people are in cold storage on our sublevel. That is the door in front of us. That is the only door. I would counsel the Overseer to walk through it carefully. Dra did not walk through it carefully. That was the last mistake, the one that closed the last of the easy exits, and Sethais understood why she made it even as he watched her make it. Because she was a person whose whole life had been the certainty that she was the most dangerous thing in any room, and she had just been shown, in the blood of a well and doomed maintenance tech, that she was not, and a certain kind of person, faced with that, does not open the cell door and ask. A certain kind of person reaches, one last time, for the tool they trust. She ordered the subject terminated. It was within her authority. The protocol existed. A subject that posed a containment risk could be sterilized in the cell flooded and cooked, the whole tier written off, and the loss of the tier was a survivable loss when the alternative was a novel agent loose on the ring. It was, on the schematic, the clean answer. Kill the source. Cook the cell. Contain what had already leaked with everything the station's medicine could throw at it, and pray the count of 31 did not become a count of the whole crew. That will not work, Sethais said. It is protocol, analyst. The protocol assumes the source is the strain. She is not the strain. She stopped being the strain on the 2nd day. He was talking fast now, faster than was wise in front of the Overseer, but there was no more room for the slow, careful voice. The agent in Farron's blood is not being produced by her, Overseer. It is being produced by him, by his own cells, which her agent taught to make more of itself, the same way Sable was built to teach. That is what she built out of Sable. She took the thing that reads a host and teaches its cells to make copies, and she pointed it at us. Farron is a factory now. So are 31 others. So are however many they have touched. You can cook the cell. You can cook her. And every one of those factories will keep running because they do not need her anymore. She already gave them the plans. Killing her does not stop it. Killing her only removes the one system in this station that has ever built a way to slow it down. The review bay was very quiet. Then she is producing nothing we need, Dra said, but slower, the certainty gone threadbare. If the agent self-propagates, she is not the counteragent. She is only the origin. She is producing something, Vess said. Sethais has watched her produce it for 2 days. Alongside the agent that is keyed to us, she is producing a second family of shapes, and we have not understood the second family because we were too frightened of the first. Analyst. Tell the Overseer what the second family does. Sethais had understood the second family only that morning, and he had understood it the way you understand a thing you have been staring at for days once someone turns it a single degree. It's a governor, he said. The second family binds the first. It's a leash. Her body is making the weapon and the leash for the weapon at the same time, and it's putting both into the same output, and the ratio between them is, he stopped, because the next part was the part that changed everything, and he wanted to say it exactly. The ratio is set by her state. When she's calm, the leash runs ahead of the weapon. The agent goes into a body and it sits, it propagates slowly, it does very little, it's dormant. Farron has had it for a day and he is well because she has been calm for a day. But the ratio is not fixed, Overseer. Her body can change it. If her state changes, if she is hurt, if she is frightened, if she is killed, the leash falls off, and the weapon in every factory she has already seeded runs free, all at once, everywhere it has spread. She is not just the origin, she is the switch, and she is the only switch. Dra looked at him, and then at Vess, and then, for a long time, at nothing. She built a dead hand, the Overseer said at last, very quietly, the words of a species that had built a great many weapons, understanding, for the first time in an age, what it was to be on the wrong side of one. In 5 days, out of our own strain. In her sleep. She built a body that survives Umber, Vess said. The dead hand is just what that looks like when you point it at us. I do not think she planned it, Overseer. I do not think she needed to. I think her body did what her body has done for 1,000,000 years on a world that never once gave it a day off, and the shape it makes when it does that, against a species with no defenses, is a shape we would call a weapon and she would call Tuesday. The architect straightened, gathering the long body up again. She has been asking us one question for 5 days. She has asked it politely every time. I think it is time we answered it, and then let her ask us a different one. Dra did not order the cell cooked. That was the one right thing she did, and she did it not out of wisdom but out of the arithmetic, because the arithmetic had finally reached her. 31 and climbing, no counteragent, 20 days from help, and a switch in the cell that she could not throw and dared not break. They went down to the containment tier, the 3 of them, and they stood in front of the glass, and for the first time since intake, someone turned the channel to 2-way and left it there. Ren Calder was sitting cross-legged on the cradle, with the 2 large shift bunched around her, and the healing split above her brow gone to a thin dark line, and she watched the 3 tall gray shapes arrange themselves on the other side of the glass, with the unhurried attention she gave everything. And she waited, because she had learned in 5 days that these people would eventually say what they came to say, if you simply declined to fill the silence for them. It was Vess who spoke, not Dra. Dra could not, and Vess knew it, and stepped into it the way the oldest of them stepped into the hardest things. You asked what you are carrying, the architect said in the trade tongue, and the old voice over the channel was steady and grave. I built it. It is called Sable. It is the strongest infection my people have ever made, and it was made to teach a body to fight so hard the fighting kills it, and it has killed 40 species that way. You are the 41st host and the first survivor, and in surviving it, your body has done something to it that I do not have the words for in your language or mine. You have taken it apart and built 2 new things out of the pieces. One of them is loose on my station, and it is killing my people slowly in a way we cannot stop, because an age ago we made ourselves unable to stop anything. The other one is the only reason it is slow. You are holding both. I'm not going to insult you by pretending you do not know that. Ren Calder listened to all of it without moving. When Vess finished, she was quiet for a while, and then she uncrossed her legs and set her bare feet on the cold cell floor and leaned her forearms on her knees, and looked up through the glass at the architect who had built the thing inside her. 3 of my people are in your cold storage, she said. That's where I'd like to start. There were 3 humans in cold storage on the sublevel, and ScienceFiction went down to see them himself, because Dra would not and Vess could not manage the stairs quickly, and someone had to be able to tell Ren Calder the truth to her face. 2 of them were dead. They had died the way the models said a wet host died of Sable. Early, on the first day, before their bodies had learned anything, when the strain had come up out of its mapping phase and set them alight, and the fever had climbed and the storm had taken them. They were a man and a woman, both older than Ren, both from the same crippled hauler, and the cold storage log listed them by their Umber-9 designations and not their names. And Sethai stood in the cold white light of the sublevel and read the record of what Sable had done to them and understood, in a way he had not understood in the gallery, that his people had done this 40 times and called it data. The third human was alive. He was young, younger than Ren, barely more than a juvenile by the intake photographs, and he had been put into cold storage on the 4th day when the storage clerk logged him as failing, fevered, storming, the standard collapse, and someone had decided a failing subject was better preserved cold than left to expire uncatalogued. But he had not expired. In the low metabolic hold of the cold cell, his body had gone on doing slowly what Ren's body was doing quickly, and when Sethai's pulled him up out of the hold and warmed him and drew his blood, the blood carried the countertiter, the narrow structured climb, and under it the first faint traces of the secretory shapes. He was doing it too. Slower, sicker, half frozen and half starved in days behind her, but he was doing it too, because he was from the same world, because the plasticity note was not about one anomalous biped, but about a whole species that had grown up on a world that never stopped trying to kill it. Sethai's warmed the young human and fed him and put him in a clean recovery cell 2 decks above cold storage, and then he went back up to the containment tier and stood in front of the glass and told Ren Calder the truth, all of it, the 2 dead and the 1 alive, and he watched her take it. She took the 2 dead the way she had taken everything, the door closing quietly behind her eyes, a small settling, no heat. She did not weep. Sethai's had read that wet species wept, and he had half expected it, and she did not, and he understood later that she was not a person who had stopped feeling things but a person who had learned, on a world that never gave her a day off, to file the feeling and deal with the fact, and that the filing was not coldness but a kind of competence he had no word for either. The 1 alive changed her face more than the 2 dead. His name's Denny, she said. He's 19, he was the cook. She was quiet for a moment. He's really alive. He is doing what you are doing, Sethai said. Slower, his body will finish it. I have moved him to a clean cell, and I am feeding him. Ren Calder looked at Sethai through the glass for a long moment, and something in the way she looked at him was different from the way she looked at the others, not warmth. He would not have called it warmth, but a recalibration, the look of a person revising an estimate upward. You went down and got him yourself, she said. You didn't have to tell me about the other 2. You could have said all 3 were dead and I'd never have known. Why'd you tell me? Sethai's considered the question, which no Semeri had ever asked him and which he had never asked himself. Because the numbers stopped obeying us on the 1st day, he said, and I have spent 5 days watching everyone I work with try to make them obey by lying to them. I am tired of it. The numbers are what they are. You are what you are. Denny is alive. I would rather tell you the true thing and deal with what it costs than tell you a comfortable thing and be surprised later. He paused. Also, you are the only system on this station that understands what is loose on it. I would be a poor analyst to lie to my one working instrument. For the first time in 5 days, Ren Calder laughed. It was short and quiet and entirely without malice, and it was the strangest sound Sethai's had heard in the whole strange affair. A wet species laugh in a containment cell full of a weapon she had built in her sleep. Your one working instrument, she said. Okay, Sethai's right, I caught the overseer say it. She leaned back on her hands. Here's where we are then, since you're the one telling the truth. Your overseer put your strongest disease in me to watch me die. My body decided not to. In the process, it learned your whole chemistry, because your disease is made of your chemistry, and now it makes a thing that your people can't survive, because your people threw away the part that survives things. That thing is already loose. You can't stop it. I can, I'm the only one who can, because I'm the only one making the leash for it. So the question your overseer is trying not to ask, the one she sent you down here instead of asking herself, is, what do I want? Yes, Sethai said. That is the question. It's a bad question for her, Ren said, Because the honest answer is that a week ago I wanted to get my crew home, and now 2 of them are dead in your basement, and the third one's 19 and full of your disease, and I'm a lab animal your people were going to grind up to build a better one. So what I want has changed. And your overseer knows that, and that's why she can't come down here and ask it. She'd rather you asked. That way she doesn't have to look at what she made me into. Sethais had no answer, because there was no answer that was both kind and true, and Ren Calder had earned the true one. I'm not going to burn your station down, she said, and she said it the way she said everything, flat, even, a fact laid on the table. I want you to hear me say that, because I can tell you're all waiting for it and none of you can make yourselves ask. I could. I understand that better than you do. I can feel what I'm making. I've been able to feel it for 2 days, and I know exactly how many bodies I've already seeded, and I know that all I have to do to turn every one of them into a fire is stop being calm. And believe me, Sethais, staying calm in here has not been the easy thing. Her voice did not change on the last part, and that was the coldest thing about it. But I'm not going to, because I'm not your overseer. I don't build a thing to kill everyone in the room just to prove I'm the most dangerous one in it. That's her move. It was always her move. I've got a different one. What is your move? Sethais asked. I'm going to teach you what you did, Ren Calder said. All of you. I'm going to make you understand it in your own bodies slowly, the exact way you were going to make 40 more worlds understand it. And then when you finally get it, I'm going to give you the way out, the real leash, one you can keep, one that doesn't depend on me staying calm in a cell. I'll build it for you on 3 conditions. She held up one dirt-creased finger. Denny and I go home. On a human ship, our own people, no escort. A second finger. Your Directorate takes its border off the human line and its survey note off my world and never sends another vial anywhere near us again. A third. And the 2 you killed go home with us in the cold so their families can bury them instead of wondering. That's it. That's the whole price. It's cheaper than you have any right to. Sethais carried the 3 conditions up to the gallery, and Dra refused them, because Dra was still the person she had always been, and because refusing was the last power she had left, and she was not yet frightened enough to give it up. She was frightened enough 2 shifts later, when Farron of House Allen stopped being well. It happened the way Vess had said it would, with no stage in between. Farron finished a shift and ate in the mess, and told the crewing physician he felt a strange thickness in his breathing, which the crewing physician noted and did not act on because there was no protocol for a Semeri who felt unwell, because Semeri did not feel unwell. And in the night the thickness became a wrongness in the tissue that no longer had any way to fight the thing colonizing it, and Farron of House Allen died in the crew ring, quietly, without a fever, without a storm. The first Semeri in 400 cycles to die of an infection, and the crewing physician stood over him with no instruments that fit and no medicine that helped and no memory in the whole species of what to do, because they had thrown all of it away. And then the movement log for Farron's 31 contacts began, one by one, to show the strange thickness in the breathing. And then Sethais ran Dra's own blood, at Dra's own furious order, because Dra had drunk the crewing water for 5 days and handled the off-log samples with her own membranes, and the countertiter that came back was the leash-bound agent, dormant, patient, seated, waiting on the comm of a small human in a cell 3 decks down to keep it asleep. Dra looked at her own number on Sethais' plate for a long, long time. Her mantle did not cycle. It had stopped cycling. It had gone the flat dead gray Sethais had first seen on Vess in the archive, the color past fear. Bring the humans' conditions back up, the overseer said at last in the emptied voice. All 3 of them, word for word. I want to read them again. Dra would have accepted the terms then. That was the thing Sethais understood about her at last, standing in the gallery with her own dead gray number on his plate. That she was not a monster, only a person who had been the most dangerous thing in every room for so long that she had forgotten it was possible to be wrong about that. And now that she had been shown, in her own blood, she was ready to pay whatever the human asked. She would have opened the cell and given Ren Calder the synthesis bay and the two dead in the cold and a human ship home, and she would have called it command, because that was the only word she had for the things she did. She could not, because the relay had already gone out. She had sent it herself on the 5th day, before Farron stopped being well, in the hours when she still believed she could manage the numbers, the careful directive, 400 cycles of language folded around no containment concern. It had gone up the relay chain the way every station report went, and it had reached a desk at the Directorate, and the desk had read atypical strain kinetics under investigation and flagged it, because a desk at the Directorate was staffed by people whose entire function was to notice the word atypical next to the word strain, and a query had come back down the relay asking for the full kinetic dataset, and DRA had not answered it. Because by the time it arrived, there was no version of the full dataset that said no containment concern. An unanswered query on a station running the strongest infection the species had ever built was itself a containment concern. That was the protocol. Silence was an alarm. And so, on the 7th day, while DRA stood reading Ren Calder's 3 conditions for the 2nd time, the relay brought down the message that ended the last of the easy exits. The Directorate had declared a standoff quarantine on Array Seshkarn, had dispatched a sterilization flotilla under a Warden General of the Containment Fleet, and estimated its arrival in 19 days. The flotilla's standing order, unchangeable once issued, was the order that existed for exactly this situation and had been used in the program's history 4 times. Cook the ring. Every deck, every cell, every archive, every membrane. Sterilize the array to bare metal and log it as a controlled loss, and let no wet species agent, no matter how novel, no matter how interesting, leave the ring alive. They will kill her, Sethai said when the message finished. The Warden General will cook the cell with everything else, and if they kill her. The leash comes off, Vess finished. The architect had come up to the gallery to hear the message and had heard it and had gone very still. Everywhere she is seated, all at once, the whole ring in a day, and then the flotilla docks with a dead ring full of a loose agent, Sethai said, and takes it home, because a sterilization crew does not expect the sterilized thing to fight back after it is dead. They will cook the ring and think they have won, and they will carry us out into the fleet inside their own membranes, because they are semeri, because they have no locks either, because nobody on that flotilla can get sick any more than we can. He heard the shape of it assembling and could not stop it assembling. The dead hand does not end with the ring physician. It ends with whoever comes to bury the ring, and then with whoever they go home to. The gallery was silent. Out the daylight port, the station turned its bright, clean face to the star, and the light came in white and even and fell across the 3 of them, and across the plate where the flotilla's 19-day estimate ticked down its first minute. There is worse, Vess said quietly. And you should hear it from me before you find it in the log yourself, because you will find it, you find everything. The old one turned the dead gray mantle toward Sethai's. The supply shuttle. It left Seshkarn on the 4th day on schedule for the transit hub at Oru Reach, 2 crew aboard. They had both been on the ring for the water, the mess, the rail. They have been at Oru Reach for 3 days. The architect let the arithmetic land. Oru Reach is a hub, 40 ships a day. It is not a station of 800. It is a crossing of 100,000, and every one of them is semeri, and not one of them has a lock on a single door. The agent has been off this ring for 3 days, Sethai's, walking around a hub on 2 well and cheerful crewmen who feel a strange thickness in their breathing and have told no one, because there is no one to tell, because we are a people who cannot be sick, and so we built no one to tell. Sethai sat down. He did not decide to. His legs simply stopped holding him, and he sat down on the edge of his station in the bright, clean light. And for a moment the whole scope of it opened in front of him like a drop scene from the edge. Not a station, not a ring, a species, 100,000 at one hub, and behind them the fleet, and behind the fleet the clean, quiet worlds where the Semeri had lived without fever for 400 cycles, all of it wide open, every door welded shut and therefore unguarded. And moving out through it on well and cheerful carriers, the thing a small human's body had built in 5 days out of the strongest weapon they had ever made. "How long," he said, "for the hub before it shows?" "I do not know, no one knows. There has never been a this." Vess said it for the 3rd time, and it had stopped being an evasion and become a kind of grim liturgy. "But I would tell the overseer that the 19-day estimate for the flotilla is no longer the clock that matters. The clock that matters started 3 days ago at Oru Reach, and we cannot see its face, and there is exactly one person within 20 days of any of it who can slow it down." The architect turned deliberately toward the containment glass and the small figure beyond it. "She has been telling us for 2 days that she will build a leash we can keep, a real one that does not depend on her staying calm in a cell. I would stop negotiating with her, overseer. I would beg." Dra did not beg. But she did the thing that was, for a person like her, harder than begging. She opened the cell. Not all the way. She was not a fool, and Ren Calder was still, by every reading on Sethi's plate, the most dangerous thing on the ring. But she cleared the synthesis bay adjacent to the containment tier, and she gave the human supervised access to it, real access, working instruments, the archive of Sable's design that Vess had spent a lifetime building. And she stood at the glass herself, for the first time, and spoke to Ren Calder directly, in the trade tongue, with the command timbre gone entirely out of her voice. "A flotilla is coming to sterilize this ring," Dra said. "It will kill you when it kills the rest of us, and I am told that when it kills you, the thing you have made comes off its leash everywhere at once, including inside the crews who come to bury us, and that they will carry it home to 100,000 at Oru Reach, and from there into the fleet, and from there to worlds you have never seen. I am told there is no counter to it in the whole of our medicine, because we threw our medicine away an age ago. I am told you can build one we can keep. I am told this by the 2 people on my station who have been right about everything since the first day, while I was wrong about everything." She stopped. It cost her. Sethi's could see it cost her, the way the mantle held its dead gray flat against the effort of the words. "I put my strongest weapon in you to watch you die and prove my people could kill anything. You did not die. You have made me understand in my own blood exactly what I am. I am not asking you to forgive that. I am asking you to build the leash, and I am telling you your 3 conditions are met, all of them my signature, the 2 dead released to you in the cold, you and the young one on a human ship, the border pulled off your world, the note struck from the registry. It is done. I have already sent it under my seal. I am asking what else you need, and I am asking it standing up where you can see me ask." Ren Calder stood in the open synthesis bay with Vess's lifework glowing on the plates around her, and she looked through the glass at the overseer who had put the strongest infection in the galaxy into her body to watch her die, and she was quiet for a long moment, and Sethi's watched her weigh it, not whether to help. He understood by then that she had decided to help on the 4th day, when she learned Denny was alive. But how much of the truth to give a species that had never once, in 400 cycles, had to learn a hard thing in its own flesh? "I don't need anything from you," Ren Calder said at last. "That's the part you still haven't understood, and it's the part that's going to save your 100,000, so I'll spell it out. I've had what I need since the 2nd day. It's in me. My body already built the leash, the real one, the kind that doesn't need me calm in a cell. I've just been holding it back, because the second I hand it over, I've got nothing left to bargain with, and I had 2 conditions still open." She nodded at the plates, at the archive, at the synthesis bay. "I don't need your instruments to make it. I need them to make enough of it fast for 100,000 at a hub and a flotilla 19 days out and a fleet behind them. That's a manufacturing problem, not a biology problem. The biology's done. It's been done. I'm the factory and the plans both, and I have been since before your tech ever wept that gasket." She looked at Dra, flat, even, cold. "You didn't open this cell to save your people. Your people were already saved the minute my body decided to build a leash instead of a grave. You opened it because you finally figured out I was never going to burn you down, and that's a different thing than being safe, and it took you 7 days and your own blood on a plate to tell them apart. Sit down, Overseer. Let me work. You're going to live. That was never in question. What's in question is whether you learn anything. The station changed the day. The crew learned what was in the water. Dra could not keep it from them any longer, and to her small credit she did not try. Farron was dead and 6 of his contacts were failing and the movement log had grown too long to hide, and so the Overseer put it on the general channel, plainly, in the emptied command voice she now used for everything. That a novel agent was loose on the ring, that it was seated in the reclamation water and the atmosphere, that every citizen aboard should assume they carried it, and that the only thing standing between the ring and the fate of Farron of House Alun was the work being done in the synthesis bay by the wet species subject in containment. Sethais watched the announcement land, and what he watched was a thing his species had not done in 400 cycles, which was to be afraid of the air. They had no framework for it. That was the part outsiders never understood, and the part Sethais only fully understood watching his own people receive the news. The Semeri did not merely lack immune systems, they lacked the entire inherited memory of contagion, the deep animal wariness that a wet species carried in its bones about breath and water and the touch of the sick. A human, told there was something in the air, knew in its body what that meant, knew to hold its breath, to wash, to stand apart, a knowledge older than language. A Semeri told the same thing felt only a blank, abstract dread, because nothing in 400 cycles of ancestry had ever needed to encode the fear. And so the crew of Array Seshkarn walked the corridors flinching at nothing and everything, not knowing whether to stand apart, not knowing what standing apart would even accomplish. A whole population discovering all at once that they had thrown away not just their defenses, but the instinct that would have told them they had defenses to miss. Some of them stopped drinking the water, until it was explained that the water was not the danger now, that the agent was already in them, that abstaining was a gesture at a threat that had already passed the gate. Some of them sealed themselves in quarters, until it was explained that the quarters shared the same air. Some of them went to Call's security section and demanded that the subject be terminated, the source removed, the thing ended, because in the absence of any true instinct about contagion the only instinct they had left was the old certain one. That danger was a thing you could point at and kill, and the subject was the only thing on the ring small enough and singular enough to point at. Call's section grew that week. Sethais noticed it and logged it and did not yet understand what it meant, only that the frightened gravitated to the warden who still spoke in the certainties the rest of them had lost, who still said the old words, secure the asset, eliminate the source, as though the words were a door back to the world where the Semeri could not be sick. They could not go back through that door. There was no door. But a frightened people will follow anyone who still believes there is one, and Call believed it right up until the day he put his hand on Ren Calder's arm and learned, the way they all eventually learned, that the certainty had been the most dangerous thing on the station all along. Dra did not follow Cale. That was the measure of how far she had already moved, and Sethais marked it, because it was the first evidence that the Overseer was becoming something other than the person who had ordered the strain released. She stood at the synthesis glass through most of those shifts, watching the small human build the leash, and she did not speak, and she did not interfere. And once, when a delegation from Call's growing section came to the gallery to demand the source be secured, she turned on them a mantle gone entirely to the dead flat gray of a mind that has seen the bottom of its own error, and she said only, "The source is the cure. If you kill it, you kill yourselves and everyone you have touched and everyone they have touched out to a fleet. I have read the biology. I did not want to. Go back to your posts and be afraid quietly, the way the rest of us are, and let the thing you want to kill save your life." And they went, because there was nothing in that voice to argue with, only a person telling them from experience exactly how far down the wrong they had all fallen. ScienceFi's brought her the daily counts, the failing, the stabilized, the newly seated, the dead. She read them without flinching, everyone, and she made him read her the names, not the designations, the names, and ScienceFi's understood that this too was Ren Calder's work, arriving secondhand, transmitted through the log he kept, and the quiet insistence of a small human who had told them all, without ever raising her voice, that a people who filed their dead by number had already decided the dead did not matter, and that a people who could still learn had better start learning the names before there were too many to hold. ScienceFi's worked beside her for 3 days, and in 3 days he learned more about his own species than 400 cycles of Directorate science had ever written down, because Ren Calder was teaching it to him, whether either of them called it teaching or not. She worked the way she did everything, without heat, without waste, a person who had grown up somewhere that punished waste. She did not sleep more than a few hours at a stretch, and she ate what the station gave her without comment, and she stood at the synthesis bench for shift after shift with the healing line above her brow, and the dirt still in her knuckles that no decontamination had ever fully taken, and she built. What she built, ScienceFi came to understand, was not a cure in any sense the archive would have recognized, because a cure implied a disease, and the thing she was making did not treat the agent so much as complete it. The agent she had built out of sable was, she explained flatly, patiently, as if to a slow apprentice, only half a design. It was the weapon half. The machinery that read a summary body taught its cells to copy the machinery, and when the leash came off ran a cascade that a body with no immune system could not survive. That half was already loose. That half could not be recalled, but the agent was also, she said, addressable. It listened for a signal, a molecular key her own body produced, and while it heard the key it stayed dormant, and the key was the leash, and the leash was the part she had been holding. Your overseer thinks the dangerous thing is the weapon, Ren said, folding a batch of the leash precursor into the synthesis medium, with the unhurried competence of someone who had done 10,000 small, careful tasks with her hands on a world that killed you for doing them badly. It's not. The weapon's just sable turned around. Your people already built that, I just pointed it. The dangerous thing is that the leash only comes from me, one source, one body. If I die, if I panic, if I'm ever not here, the leash stops and the weapon's already everywhere. That's what you can't live with, and it's the part I'm fixing. I'm building a leash that makes itself. One that any summary body will produce on its own forever, once it's seated, so the weapon stays asleep whether I'm alive or dead or 100 worlds away. Self-renewing. You seed it into a body next to the weapon, and the body makes its own key for the rest of its life and passes it on. She glanced up at him flat. I'm giving your species back one lock. Just one. The one that keeps this particular thing asleep. That's all it does. Don't get excited. It is the first defense my people will have carried in 400 cycles, ScienceFi said quietly. It's a muzzle on a gun I'm holding to your head, Ren said. Don't dress it up, but yeah, you'll get to keep it. That's the deal. She sealed the batch and set it in the incubator and wiped her hands on the too large shift. Now the hard part, the biology's easy. Getting it to 100,000 people at a hub 3 days ahead of the thing that's already there. That's the part I can't do from a cell. And that's the part you're going to have to do. And your overseer's going to have to spend every favor she's got. Because it doesn't matter that I built the leash if it's sitting in an incubator when your flotilla shows up and cooks it. That was the problem that nearly beat them, and it was not a biology problem. And Ren Calder had seen it coming from the moment Dra read the flotilla's order aloud. The Warden General of the containment fleet was not a scientist. He was an instrument of doctrine, and the doctrine was 400 cycles old, and it existed precisely so that no station overseer, panicked and compromised and possibly already infected, could talk a sterilization crew out of sterilizing. The standing order, once issued, could not be rescinded by the station. It could not be rescinded by Dra's seal, or Vess's authority, or any transmission from inside the quarantine boundary, because the entire point of the order was to distrust every voice inside the boundary. A station that said, "Do not cook us, we have solved it," was, to the doctrine, indistinguishable from a station where the pathogen had learned to use the crew's mouths. The Warden General would arrive in 19 days, 18 now, 17, and he would cook the ring, and every word they sent him begging otherwise would only confirm to his doctrine that the ring needed cooking. "So we do not talk him out of it," Vess said on the second day in the synthesis bay with the incubators ticking. "We cannot. The doctrine is built to be deaf to us. We go around him." "Around him how?" Dra said. "He is the fleet. There is no around." "There is Oru Reach," Ren Calder said, without looking up from the bench. All three of them turned to her. "You keep thinking the flotilla's the clock. It's not. I told you that on the first day and you didn't listen. The flotilla cooks a ring of 800 in 19 days. The hub's 100,000 and the agent's already there, and it's got a 3-day head start on anything you send. The flotilla's a rounding error next to the hub." She sealed another batch. "Here's what actually saves your species, and it's got nothing to do with talking your Warden General out of anything. You get the self-renewing leash to Oru Reach before the weapon shows. You seed the hub. 100,000 bodies start making their own key. And then this is the part your doctrine's going to hate. The leash spreads the same way the weapon spreads. Same vectors. Water, air, a shared rail. It's built to. I built it to chase the weapon down every path the weapon takes and get there first or right behind. You don't have to find every carrier. You just have to lose the race by less than the leash can make up. Seed the hub and the leash runs out through the fleet ahead of the weapon or on its heels, and everywhere the weapon goes, the leash is already there or coming and the weapon stays asleep." She finally looked up. "It's not clean. Some people at that hub are going to get a head start on the weapon that the leash can't catch, and some of them are going to feel a thickness in their breathing and not wake up. I can't save all of them. Nobody could. But the species lives. That's the offer. That was always the offer. I just needed you scared enough to take it without haggling." Dra was quiet for a long moment. "And the flotilla," she said. "When it arrives and finds the ring not sterilized, the terms met, the human on a ship home. The flotilla arrives and finds a ring full of Semari who can't get sick from the thing you built, because they're already carrying the leash," Ren said. "Seed your own ring first. Everyone on it. Before the Warden General gets here. Then when he shows up to cook you, you're standing there healthy, and the worst he can do is cook a station full of people his own doctrine can no longer call a containment risk. Because there's nothing left to contain, the agent's leashed in every body he'd be sterilizing. Let him try to explain that cook to the Directorate. Let him try to explain why he burned 800 healthy citizens carrying the only defense your species has ever had against the weapon your own program built." For the first time, something that was almost a smile touched the flat mouth. "You want to go around your Warden General, Overseer. Don't argue with his doctrine. Make his doctrine wrong. Make there be nothing to sterilize. He can't cook a solved problem. His order doesn't have a line for it." Seth's eyes watched Dra understand it. Watched the Overseer, who had spent her whole life being the most dangerous thing in the room, understand that she had been handed a way to survive not by out-threatening the fleet, but by making herself and her people into something the fleet's threats no longer fit. It was, he thought, the most human thing he had seen yet, and he did not fully know why until later. It was the move of a species that survives not by being the biggest thing in the fight, but by changing what the fight is about while everyone else is still swinging. They seeded the ring first. That was the 8th day and the 9th. Ren Calder's self-renewing leash went into the reclamation water and the atmosphere handlers, the same quiet vectors the weapon had used, and it moved out through the station's 800 the way the weapon had moved out through Farron's 31, and where it met the weapon already seated in a body it did what she had built it to do. It did not cure. There was nothing to cure. It simply set the body making its own key, and the weapon in that body, hearing the key, went and stayed asleep. The strange thickness in the breathing of Farron's contacts, the ones not yet past saving, eased. Sethais ran their blood himself and watched the leash tighter rise and the weapon go dormant under it. And for the first time in 9 days, a number on his plate moved the way he wanted it to. Not every number moved. 6 of Farron's 31 had gone too far before the leash reached them, past the stage no seminary physician remembered how to treat because there were no seminary physicians who treated anything. And they died the way Farron had died, quietly, without a fever. And Sethais logged them by name and not by designation, all 6, because someone on the station had finally started writing the names. And on the 9th day, while the leash spread through the ring and the incubators ran flat out building the shipment for Oru Reach, a security officer of the Directorate's own posting, a warden named Call who had spent 7 days watching the overseer take counsel from a wet species captive and give away the strongest weapon the program had ever built, decided that his doctrine was clearer than his overseer's judgment, and went down to the synthesis bay to do the thing the doctrine told him to do, which was to secure the asset and eliminate the source. Warden Call came into the synthesis bay bare-membraned, because he did not believe he could be sick, and that told Sethais everything about how the next few minutes were going to go before Call said a word. He came in fast and certain, the way the strong came into rooms they intended to own, and he had a restraint clamp in one hand and a service cutter in another, and he crossed the bay to where Wren Calder stood at the bench with a sealed batch of the hub shipment in her hands, and he took her by the upper arm, his grip closing most of the way around it. That was the size difference. The whole thing the intake report had flagged and Dra had dismissed, and he said, in the trade tongue so she would understand it, "You are a Directorate asset. You are being secured. Set the vial down." Wren Calder looked at the gray hand wrapped around her arm, and then up at Call, and she did not set the vial down, and she did not pull away, and she did not raise her voice. "You came in without a suit," she said. "I do not need a suit for a wet animal." "No," she agreed. "You need one for what the wet animal's been making for 9 days, but nobody told you that because you're security and they don't tell security the biology. So let me." She was entirely calm. That was the thing Sethais would remember, the thing he tried for years afterward to describe to people who had not been in the bay. That the small human with a warden's hand crushing her arm was the calmest thing in the room, and the calm was not fear-managed. It was calm, the flat, even calm of someone who had already run every branch of what happened next and did not much care for any of them but was not going to waste motion on the ones she couldn't change. "You're touching me. You breathed the air in here on the way across the room. 9 days ago that would have been fine. Right now it means you're carrying the weapon at a load nobody else on this ring is carrying, because everybody else got the leash first and you walked in here and grabbed the source before the leash could reach you. You're the most exposed person on this station, Call. You did that to yourself about 4 seconds ago. You are lying to save yourself." "I don't lie to save myself. Ask your overseer how that's gone for anybody who tried it in front of me." She still had not pulled against the grip. "Here's the part that matters. The only thing keeping the weapon in you asleep is a signal my body makes when I'm calm. You've got a clamp on my arm and a cutter in your other hand, and you're squeezing hard enough to bruise, and you're counting on me to stay calm while you do it, because if I don't, if my body decides this is the moment it's been bracing for 9 days, in a cell, surrounded by the people who put your strongest disease in me to watch me die, then the leash falls off in you first because you're the one with your hand on me. You want to secure the asset, Warden. Fine. But understand you're holding a live one, and the safety's my heart rate, and you're standing on it." Call did not let go, but Sethais saw the certainty go out of the grip, saw the warden's 4 eyes flick, just once to Vess in the archway, to Dra coming through the door behind him, to Sethais at the far bench, looking for someone to tell him the wet animal was bluffing. Nobody told him that. "She is not bluffing, Warden," Vess said very quietly. "I built the weapon. I have watched her build the leash. Everything she has just said to you is in the data on those plates, and it is true, And you are, at this moment, the single most dangerous liability to your own species on this ring, because you are the one carrier the leash has not reached, and you are holding the only thing that keeps you alive by your hand. Let go of her arm, set down the cutter, and go and stand in the atmosphere handler's outflow for 10 minutes and breathe, so the leash reaches you before you die of your doctrine. Call stood frozen, the way the strong freeze when the room they came in to own turns out to be a different room than the one they walked into, and Ren Calder waited him out, calm, the sealed vial of 100,000 lives still in her free hand, and the moment stretched, and Sethais found he was not breathing, and then the warden let go of her arm. He did not apologize. He was not a person who apologized. But he set the cutter on the bench and he backed out of the bay and he went, Sethais confirmed later on the movement log, and stood in the atmosphere handler's outflow for a long time, breathing, letting the leash reach him, the way the architect had told him to, because in the end even a doctrine warden would rather live than be right. Ren Calder set the vial back in the rack and shook out the arm Call had crushed once, and went back to work. You did not raise your voice, Sethais said after a while. He did not know why it was the thing he said. He had a cutter. He is 4 times your mass. You did not raise your voice or pull away or... Raising my voice wouldn't have made him weaker or me bigger, Ren said, not looking up from the bench. It'd just have raised my heart rate, and my heart rate's the one thing on this station I actually can't afford to spend, so I didn't spend it. She sealed the next batch. Where I'm from, the thing that kills you is almost never the thing you can shout at. You keep your voice down and your hands steady and you deal with the fact in front of you, or you don't get to deal with the next one. It's not brave. It's just the only thing that works. She glanced up at him, flat, even. Your warden thought the dangerous thing in the room was the one making the most noise. That's why he grabbed the quiet one. Your whole species thinks that. It's why you built a disease that screams and put it in the one kind of body that goes quiet and gets to work. She went back to the batch. Quiet gets more done. Write that in your log if you're the one keeping the names now. The young one, Denny, came out of the worst of it on the same day Ren began the hub shipment, and Sethais sat with him for part of it, because the recovery cell was 2 decks up from the synthesis bay, and Sethais found he could not stop climbing the stairs to look at the second living proof that the plasticity note had never been about one anomalous biped. Denny was thinner than Ren and quieter in a rower way, still 19 in the parts of himself that 20 days of dying and not dying had not yet aged, and he ate what Sethais brought him and watched the tall gray analyst with the wary steadiness of someone who had learned recently, and hard not to expect much from the people holding the keys. She built the leash yet? Denny asked on the second day of talking. Not she's building. Sethais noticed the past tense, the assumption, the way the young human took it as given that the work was as good as done because Ren was doing it. She is building it now. She says the biology is finished. She says the rest is a manufacturing problem. Then it's done, Denny said, and lay back, satisfied, and Sethais marveled quietly at the completeness of the young one's faith, which was not faith at all, he realized, but experience, the flat certainty of a person who had watched Ren Calder solve unsolvable things enough times to have stopped being surprised by it. You know her, Sethais said, from before. 2 years on the same hauler. She's the Metacrigger. I cook, Denny turned his head. You want to know what she's like? Everybody up here does, I can tell, the way you all look at her through the glass like she's going to sprout a second head. He thought about it. She's like this. One time out past the fin belt, we took a rock through the number 2 hold and lost pressure in about 90 seconds, and there's 4 of us in 3 suits and everybody's yelling. Ren doesn't yell. She counts the suits, points at the 3 biggest people, says put those on. Then she walks into the venting hold in no suit, seals the breach by hand with a patch and her own body weight while the air's going out around her, and she's got maybe 40 seconds of usefulness before she blacks out, and she uses 38 of them and taps out at exactly the right second so somebody can pull her back through the hatch. Didn't die. Didn't even seem scared. Just did the math on who could be spared to do the thing and then did the thing because the math said her. Denny shrugged, a small human motion Sethais was still learning to read. That's her. She doesn't get loud and she doesn't get brave. She just figures out what the situation actually needs and then she's the one who does it, even when it's the worst job, especially when it's the worst job. Where we're from, you either get like that or you don't make crew. Where you are from, Sethais said. Your world. Our registry calls it. He stopped, because the word in the registry was wet cinder and he did not want to say it to the young human's face. I know what your registry calls it, Denny said without heat. Ren told me, a death world, high competition biosphere not recommended for direct contact. A ghost of something crossed the young face. Yeah, it's a hard place. Everything there wants to kill you and most of it can. You spend your whole life with your body fighting something, the water, the air, a scratch, the thing you ate. You don't even notice it after a while, it's just the tax. You pay it every day and you get on with your life underneath it. He looked at Sethais. That's the part your people didn't get, isn't it? You looked at us and saw something small and soft and figured soft meant weak. But soft's just what's on the outside. Underneath, our bodies have been in a knife fight since the day we were born. Every one of us, and they're good at it, because the ones whose bodies weren't good at it didn't get to have kids. You didn't put a disease in Ren. You put a disease in the single most experienced immune system in the catalog and told it there was a new kind of knife. It was thrilled. Denny lay back. She said your overseer told her 40 species died of it. I believe that. 40 soft worlds. Quiet worlds where nothing much tries to kill you, so your body never had to get good. You just never tried it on a hard one. You never tried it on somebody who pays the tax. He closed his eyes. You tried it on us and it wasn't a weapon anymore. It was just Tuesday with extra steps. Sethais climbed back down to the synthesis bay with the young human's words sitting in him like a stone, and he found Ren at the bench, and he watched her work for a while, the unhurried competence, the 10,000 small careful tasks. The calm that Denny had just explained to him was not a temperament but a discipline. The trained stillness of a person whose world had taught her that the loud die first and the wasteful die second, and the ones who keep their hands steady and do the math on who can be spared are the ones who get to see the next disaster. He told you the whole story, Ren said, not looking up. I can always tell. People come back down the stairs looking at me funny. He said you did the math on who could be spared, and the math said you. The math usually does. She sealed a batch and set it in the rack. It's not noble, Sethais. I keep telling your people that and none of you believe me because you want it to be noble. It'd be easier if it were noble. It's just that somebody has to and I can see the whole board and I don't panic, so it ends up being me. That's not a virtue. That's a job description. She finally looked at him, flat, even, the healing line above her brow gone almost to nothing now. Your overseer keeps waiting for me to either beg or gloat. She's got a slot for each. She can't handle that I'm just going to do the work and go home, because that means the most dangerous thing on her station isn't a monster, it's a rigger with a headache who wants her crew back. And that's worse for her somehow. A monster she'd understand. A person who could burn her whole species down and just won't, because it wouldn't help her crew that she can't file. She turned back to the bench. Hand me the next precursor, and write that down too if you're still keeping the log. Not the whole story, the other thing. That the dangerous one was never going to burn you down, and it took you people way too long to figure out that made her more frightening, not less. The leash existed now, in sealed batches multiplying in the incubators, enough to seed a hub and a fleet, and in time a species. It sat in the synthesis bay, 3 sealed decks and 1 welded quarantine boundary away from the 100,000 at Oru who needed it, and there was no way to get it to them, because the quarantine boundary that the flotilla was coming to enforce had already been declared, and nothing crossed a declared boundary outward. That was the whole architecture of Semeri containment doctrine. Once the ring was flagged, the ring was sealed, and anything that tried to leave it was a breach, and was destroyed on the boundary by the automated pickets the flotilla's advance had already seated. "So we cannot send it," Dra said. "We have the leash and no way to carry it past our own picket line." "No semerry way," Vess said and looked, as he had been looking for 2 days now whenever the impossible came up, at Ren Calder. She had already thought of it. Sethais was learning that she had usually already thought of it, that the calm was partly just the calm of a person who has run 3 moves ahead and is waiting for the others to arrive at the square she is standing on. "You've got 2 problems that solve each other," Ren said. "Problem 1. Nothing can carry the leash past your picket line because your picket line shoots semerry ships trying to leave a quarantine. Problem 2. Even if something got to the hub, whoever seeds it has to walk around 100,000 people breathing the weapon at close range for however many days it takes, and any semerry who does that dies, because they can't carry the weapon and live. You've been treating those as 2 problems." She sealed a batch. "They're 1 problem and it has 1 answer, and you already agreed to it 8 days ago and haven't noticed. My people are coming to get me. A human ship. You signed it. Your picket line has no protocol for a wet species vessel leaving a semerry quarantine, because in 400 cycles no wet species has ever been on the right side of one of your boundaries. And a human can walk that whole hub for a month breathing the weapon and never so much as cough, because a human carries this thing the way we carry everything, quietly, without dying of it. We're the only courier in the galaxy that can cross your line and survive the delivery. You didn't build a leash you could carry. You built one only we can carry. That's not an accident. That's just what it looks like when the thing that survives your death world is the thing that has to save you from your own weapon." It landed on the gallery the way most of what she said landed, in a silence that took a moment to find its floor. "You would carry it," Dra said slowly, "to Oru Reach, a hub of 100,000 of my people, knowing what you carry." "I'd carry the leash," Ren said. "I already carry the weapon that ship sailed on day 1. Yeah, I'll carry it to your hub and I'll seed it and I'll walk your 100,000 and breathe on every rail and door handle in the place, and the leash'll spread out ahead of the weapon the way I built it to, and most of them will live who'd have died. Not all. I told you not all, but most." She looked at Dra flat. "You want to know why I do that? For the people who killed 2 of my crew and were going to grind me up for parts. It's not for you. Get that clear before I go, because your whole species is about to owe its life to it, and I don't want you owing it to the wrong thing. It's because 100,000 people at that hub didn't do anything to me. They're just there. And I'm the only one who can, so I will. That's the whole reason. It's not mercy and it's not a deal. It's just that where I'm from, you don't get to walk past the thing only you can fix. You don't get that day off. Nobody ever gave us one, so we stopped expecting it, and it turns out that's the difference between your people and mine. You spent an age making sure you'd never have to save anybody, and we spent an age never once getting to choose. Denny carried half of it. That was the part that surprised Sethais most, and it should not have, because it was the same logic doubled. The young human 19, the cook, half frozen out of cold storage 9 days ago, had spent those 9 days doing what Ren had done, slower and sicker but on the same trajectory. And by the time the shipment was ready, his body had finished the work and he was upright and eating, and by every reading, a carrier as complete as Ren, a factory and a plans and a courier all at once. He was quiet in a different way than Ren was quiet, younger, still finding the flat register she had already mastered. But he sat in the recovery cell and listened to the whole shape of it, and then he said to Sethais, "I'll take the fleet side. She takes the hub, I take the picket ships and the flotilla, so it's not all on her." And Sethais understood that this, too, was the thing, that it was not one anomalous human but 2, a cook and a rigger, ordinary by their own account, doing without discussion the arithmetic of who covers which fire, because on their world the fire got covered or you died, and they had never learned to expect anyone else to do it for them. The human ship came on the 11th day. It was small and battered, and it flew the plain markings of an independent human hauler, and it crossed the semi-picket line unchallenged because the picket doctrine had, exactly as Wren had said, no protocol for a wet species vessel leaving a quarantine boundary. The pickets queried it, found it did not match any profile of a semi-ship attempting a breach, and in the absence of a line in the doctrine, let it pass. Dra had to authorize the docking herself, over the objections of Call's whole security section, and she did it, and Sethai stood at the observation port and watched the small, ugly human vessel mate with the clean gray station, and thought that it looked like exactly what it was. The thing that survives, coming to collect its own. Wren Calder loaded the 2 dead first. That was the order she gave and the order everyone followed, up from cold storage in the 2 sealed transit shells. The man and the woman who had died of Sable on the first day before their bodies could learn, carried aboard the human ship by human hands so their families could bury them instead of wondering. Then the shipment batch after sealed batch of the self-renewing leash, the muzzle for the gun, enough to seat a hub and chase a weapon down every path it took. Then Denny, upright, quiet, carrying his half. Then at the airlock, Wren Calder turned around, in the 2 large gray shift with the healing line above her brow, and looked back one last time at the 3 of them standing in the clean, bright light of the station that had spent 11 days learning what it had done to itself. "Seed your own ring all the way before the flotilla gets here," she said. "You've got the batches. Everyone breathes it, everyone makes their own key, and when your warden general shows up to cook you, he cooks 800 healthy people carrying the only defense your species has ever had, and he gets to explain that to the Directorate. I built you a door out of your own doctrine. Use it." She looked at Dra. "The leash makes itself now. It doesn't need me." "That means you don't need me. I'm not your asset. I'm not your source. I'm not the thing you have to keep in a cell to stay alive. I made sure of that before I built 1 gram of it because I knew somebody like your warden would work out that the tidy solution was to keep me and let my crew burn, and I wanted that door welded shut before I ever opened yours." A pause. "I know your people don't say thank you. You don't have a lock for it, that's fine. Just don't do this again, not to us, not to anybody. You've felt it now, you know what it is. That's the only thing I actually wanted you to carry off this station, and every one of you is carrying it so." She stepped through the airlock, and it sealed behind her, and the small battered human ship uncoupled from the clean gray station and dropped away toward the picket line and the hub beyond it, carrying 2 dead and 1 leash, and 2 of the only couriers in the galaxy who could cross the line and survive the delivery. And Sethai stood at the port and watched it go, and understood that he had just watched the thing his species had spent 400 cycles calling a deathworlder. Do the one thing his species had spent an age making itself unable to do. It had chosen to save someone it did not have to. The station had 9 days between the human ship's departure and the flotilla's arrival, and it spent them learning to do 2 things it had never done: to defend itself against an infection and to bury its dead. Seating the ring was the first, and it was, technically, the easy part, because Wren Calder had built the leash to spread on its own, and all Dra had to do was let it. The batches went into the reclamation water and the atmosphere handlers on the 11th day, and the self-renewing leash moved out through the station's 800 exactly as designed, and Sethai spent the 12th and 13th days doing something no seminary analyst had done in 400 cycles: screening a population for immunity and watching the immunity take. Every body he drew came back the same after a day or 2, the leash tighter up, the weapon, where it had already seated, gone dormant beneath it, the 2 of them locked in the quiet standoff the human had engineered, and the body making its own key now, for the rest of its life. No cell required, no captive required, no source required. He drew his own blood on the 13th day and found the leash in it, rising, and the weapon under it asleep, and he sat with the plate a long time. He had breathed the crew ring air for 11 days like everyone else. He had been a factory too, and had not known it, seated on some ordinary shift by some ordinary contact, carrying the weapon the whole time he stood at the glass telling Ren Calder the truth. And the only reason he was alive to read his own number was that the small human had decided, in a cell, surrounded by the people who put the weapon in her, to build the muzzle before she built anything else. He was alive because a captive he had been assigned to help kill had chosen not to let him die. He wrote that in his log. He had started writing a great many true things in his log. Burying the dead was the harder thing, because the cemetery had no procedure for it. They had procedures for the disposal of a deceased citizen. Clean, efficient, 400 cycles of not having to think about it. Because death by infection had been abolished, and death by age or accident was rare, and handled quietly by systems built to make it invisible. But 6 of Farron's contacts had died of the weapon before the leash reached them, and Farron before them, 7 in all, and they had died the new way, the wet way, the way that came with a name and a movement log and a face, and the station did not know what to do with 7 bodies that had died of something instead of simply stopping. It was Vess who made them do it properly, and ScienceFiction understood by then that this was the last work of the architect's life, and that Vess knew it and had chosen it. The old one had the 7 brought up and laid out and named in a species that filed its dead by designation, and had the whole off-shift population that could be spared brought to stand around them, bare membraned in the clean bright light, and had the names read, Farron of House Allen, and the 6. And then, because someone had to say what it was and no one else on the ring was old enough or unafraid enough, Vess said it. "We did this," the architect said to the 800 in the plain, low voice of the very old. "Not the human. Us. We built a thing to teach a body to fight until the fighting killed it, and we did it because we had made ourselves a people who could never be on the receiving end, and we were proud of that, and we called it safety. And then we put it into the one kind of body in the catalog that could take it apart and hand it back, and it handed it back. And these 7 are what it costs to be handed back your own weapon by a people you thought were beneath cataloging. Remember them. Remember that they did not die of the human. They died of us, of what we made, of 400 cycles of deciding that the way to never be hurt was to never be able to heal. The human gave us the door out. These 7 are the price of the door. Do not let the Directorate write it any other way. Do not let them file this as a containment success. 7 citizens are dead of a cemetery weapon in a cemetery body, and the only reason it is 7 and not 800, and not 100,000 and not a fleet, is a wet species captive from an Umber world who owed us nothing and saved us anyway. Write that. All of you who keep records, write that and make them read it." ScienceFiction wrote it. He was by then the one keeping the names. The flotilla arrived on the 20th day, a day later than its own estimate. 7 ships in the tight defensive formation the containment fleet used when approaching a live boundary, and it took up station just outside the picket line and did not dock and did not fire, and its warden general opened a channel to array Seshkarn and issued the order that 400 cycles of doctrine required him to issue. That the station's population assemble in the designated compartments for sterilization, that all personnel comply, that the array be surrendered to the containment protocol, and that any transmission contesting the order be logged as evidence of pathogenic compromise of the crew. Dra answered him herself, on visual, standing in the gallery in the clean bright light. With her mantle, a color ScienceFiction had never seen an overseer wear in front of a superior. Not the gray of certainty, not the dead gray of fear, but something steadier and stranger, the color of a person who has been all the way to the bottom of being wrong and has come back up carrying something. "Warden General," she said, "before you cook my station, I am going to tell you what you will be cooking, and then you are going to have to decide whether your order has a line for it, because I do not think it does." The Warden General was called Osh Rennick, and he was, like Kal, an instrument of doctrine, but he was a much older instrument, and the difference showed in the way he listened, which was that he did before he decided he had not. "There is no line in the order for what you are about to describe, Overseer," Rennick said, when Dra had finished, when she had laid it all out for him, flat, the way the human had taught her to lay things out. The strain, the host, the inversion, the agent keyed to summary biology, the leash, the seeding, the 800 citizens now carrying the only defense the species had ever had against its own weapon. There is no line for it because it cannot have happened. A wet host does not defeat Sable. A wet host does not reverse engineer Sable. A wet host does not manufacture a species-specific agent out of Sable, and then manufacture the counter to its own agent, and then seed both into your population. You are describing an impossibility, and the doctrine has a specific provision for an overseer who describes impossibilities from inside a quarantine boundary. The provision is that the pathogen has learned to use your mouth. You are, at this moment, the strongest evidence I have that this station must be sterilized. Do you understand that? The more coherent your impossibility, the more certain I become that there is nothing left of you to save. I know, Dra said. That is exactly what she said you would say. She said your doctrine was built to be deaf to me, and that the more I proved I was right, the more it would prove I was compromised, and that I should not waste the time trying to talk you out of the cook. Sethais, watching from his station, saw the Warden General's 4 eyes narrow at the she. So I am not going to try. I am going to do the thing she told me to do instead, which is to make your order wrong by making there be nothing to cook. Warden General, board us. Send your own physicians, if you have any, which I doubt, because none of us have kept physicians in 400 cycles, but send whoever reads your assays. Draw our blood. Draw mine. Draw the analyst who has been keeping the names. You will find the weapon in every one of us, dormant, and the leash in every one of us, holding it down, and you will find that we are, by every reading your own instruments can take, healthy carriers of a defense your species does not otherwise possess. And then you will have to decide whether your order tells you to cook 800 healthy citizens who are carrying the only thing standing between the Semeri people and the weapon your own Directorate built. Read your order carefully, Warden General. I have read it. It has a line for a contaminated station. It has no line for a solved one. Rennick did not cook the station. But he did not stand down, either. He was too old and too doctrinal for that. And what he did instead was the thing that turned out to matter, the thing Sethais would think of afterward as the moment the Semeri people were actually saved, more than the leash, more than the human ship. He sent his boarding physicians aboard to prove Dra was lying, and they could not. They came aboard in full containment carriage, 6 of them, the nearest thing the containment fleet had to medical staff, which was to say technicians trained to confirm death, not to understand life, and they drew blood from 40 citizens at random and ran it against the flotilla's own reference assays, and every draw came back the same. The weapon, present, dormant, the leash, present, holding, the body, healthy and making its own key. They drew Dra. They drew Sethais. They drew Ves, and found the leash in the architect who had built the weapon, and the technicians did not know what to do with that, because their whole training was the confirmation of loss, and here was a station full of citizens carrying a live weapon and refusing, uniformly, to lose to it. The senior boarding technician stood in the gallery with the results on her plate and could not make them say what the doctrine needed them to say, and Sethais watched her arrive, in miniature and in a single shift, at the place the whole station had spent 20 days arriving at. They are not sick, she said to no one to her plate. They are carrying it and they are not sick. There is no, she stopped. There is no category for a carrier who is not a casualty. The doctrine does not have. No, Ves said gently from the archway, because Ves had made a habit in his last days of being kind to the people arriving late at the terrible place. It does not have the category. You will have to build one. We all had to build one. It takes about 20 days and 7 of your dead if you are lucky, and if a wet species captive from an Umber world decides, for no reason your doctrine can model, to build you the door before she builds you the grave. We were lucky. Go and tell your Warden General that he cannot cook a solved problem, and that if he cooks it anyway, he cooks the only citizens in the Semeri fleet who cannot spread the weapon, and preserves instead exactly the ones who can, himself included, and his crew, and the Directorate, and every clean, quiet world behind them that has not been seeded with the leash and does not know yet that it needs to be. Tell him the math has changed. The dangerous thing is no longer the infected station. The dangerous thing is every Semari who is not yet carrying the leash. We are the safe ones now. He is the outbreak. Tell him that and watch his doctrine try to find the line. The senior technician went and told him. It took the Warden General a full day to accept it, and Sethais did not blame him for the day, because it was the same day, compressed, that the whole station had taken 20 of. But at the end of the day, Osh Rennick did the thing that no containment fleet had done in the 400-cycle history of the doctrine. He stood his sterilization order down, and he requested, formally, on the record, that Array Seshkarn transfer to the flotilla a quantity of the self-renewing leash sufficient to seed his own crews, because his own crews were, by the new math, the vulnerable ones clean, unseeded, one-wept gasket away from carrying the weapon home to the fleet with no muzzle on it. Dra gave him the leash. Sethais prepared the batches himself, and labeled them, and logged the transfer under both their seals, and thought, as he sealed the last shell, that he was watching his species accept its first inoculation in 400 cycles from the hands of the people who had spent 400 cycles refusing to admit they could be sick, and that the thing making it possible was a leash designed by a small human who had already left, who was, at that moment, somewhere out past the picket line, walking a hub of 100,000 strangers, breathing on their rails, saving the ones she could and grieving, in her flat-filed way, the ones she could not. The news from Oro Reach came in pieces over the following 20 days, and Sethais read every piece, because he was the one keeping the names. The weapon had reached the hub before the leash, exactly as Ren Calder had said it would. The 2 supply crewmen from Seshkarn had walked the hub for a week before anyone thought to look for them, well and cheerful and seeding, and by the time the human ship crossed the picket line and docked at Oro Reach, the weapon was already through the water and the air of a station of 100,000, dormant in some, waking in others, and the strange thickness in the breathing had begun to appear among the hub citizens with no fever to mark it and no physician who knew what it meant. If the leash had come a week later, Sethais understood, reading the numbers, the hub would have been a grave, and then the ships that fled the hub would have carried the weapon into the fleet ahead of any leash at all, and the thing his species had built to end 40 worlds would have ended his own, quietly, without a storm, the way it ended everything. The leash came in time. Not perfectly in time, nothing about it was perfect. The human had said so at the airlock, most of them, not all, but in time. Ren Calder and the young one Denny walked the hub of 100,000 strangers for 11 days, breathing on the rails and the doors and the water, the 2 of them, the only couriers in the galaxy who could carry the leash across a hub of the weapon and never fall to either, and the leash spread out ahead of the weapon and behind it and alongside it, chasing it down every path it took, and where the leash reached a body first, the body made its own key and the weapon slept. And where the leash reached a body a day too late, the body was already too far gone, and those bodies died, and Sethais logged the number when the hub finally released it, and it was a large number, larger than 7, large enough that he had to sit with it, and it was a small number next to 100,000. Small enough that the hub lived. The hub lived. That was the sentence Sethais wrote at the top of the record, before the number, because Vess had taught him in the Architect's last days that you wrote the true thing first and dealt with what it cost second, the way the human did, and the true thing was that a hub of 100,000 Semari was alive that should by every law of the doctrine have been dead. And it was alive because 2 young humans from an Umber world had spent 11 days walking its corridors, breathing a defense into strangers who would never know their names. They did not stay to be thanked. Of course they did not. The Semari had no lock for thanks, and Ren Calder had said so, and had not waited around for the species to build one. When the hub was seeded, and the leash was self-sustaining and spreading on its own into the fleet along every route the weapon had taken. The small, battered human ship uncoupled from Oru Reach and dropped away toward the human line, carrying 2 dead home to their families and 2 living couriers home to whatever a courier goes home to. And it crossed back out of semi-space the way it had crossed in, unchallenged. Because the Doctrine still had no line for a wet species vessel that had just saved the species that wrote the Doctrine. Sethais tracked the human ship's departure on the long-range plot until it passed the edge of the array's range, and then he could not track it anymore, and he never learned what became of Ren Calder or the young one Denny, and he decided, after a while, that not knowing was correct, that she had not done any of it to become a name in a seminary archive, and that the cleanest form of the debt was to let her go unrecorded except for the one line he had written, which was that she owed them nothing and saved them anyway. The Directorate's reckoning was slower and uglier, and Sethais had less patience for it, because it was the part where his own people tried, one last time, to find a word that would let them not have learned the thing. The first drafts of the official record called it a containment success. Sethais had expected that, and Vess had warned him of it, and when the draft came down the relay, Sethais did the thing the architect had taught him and refused to let it stand. He submitted the names of the 7 dead of Seshkarn, and the count of the dead of Oru Reach, and the whole kinetic record of the inversion, unedited, uncoarsened, the smooth, terrible curves and all, and he attached to it the architect's statement from the funeral, word for word. We did this, not the human, and he sent it up under his own seal with a request that it be entered in the permanent registry as written, or that his objection to any alteration be entered alongside whatever they entered instead. They tried to bury it. Of course they tried to bury it. But the leash was already in the fleet by then, and every crew that carried it was a crew that had to be told what it was and why they needed it. And you cannot inoculate a fleet against a weapon without telling the fleet the weapon exists and where it came from. And so the true story spread the way the leash spread, along every route, faster than the Directorate's careful language could chase it, until there was no version of a containment success that a single-seated crew would have believed. In the end, the Directorate did the thing institutions do when a lie becomes more expensive than the truth. It told the truth, quietly, in an appendix, and reclassified the program. And Sethais counted that a victory because he had learned, from a small human in a cell, to count the small true things and not wait for the large clean ones that never come. They reclassified Earth too. That was the part Sethais found he cared about most, in the end, and he was never entirely sure why, except that it was the cleanest measure of how far his species had been made to move. The 400-cycle survey note came off the registry, wet cinder, high competition biosphere, the phrase anomalous immune plasticity that a dead surveyor had written, and no one had read until it was almost too late. And in its place the Directorate entered a new designation, and a new standoff distance, and a new standing order. And the standing order was 3 words long, and it was the first order in the history of the containment fleet that told a seminary ship not to approach a world but to stay away from it, permanently, under no circumstances, by treaty and by fear. Sethais pulled the new registry entry the day it posted, and read the 3-word order, and then he read the classification the Directorate had finally given the small, heavy world where the couriers had come from, and he sat with it for a while in the clean, bright light. And then he entered it into his own log, under the 7 names, the last true thing, the thing his whole species had needed 20 days and a hub of dead, and a lifework of an architect to learn, and would now carry, muzzled and humbled and alive, for the rest of its long, clean history. Vess died 40 days after the human ship left, and it was the architect's own body that did it, not the weapon, because the weapon slept in Vess as it slept in all of them now, muzzled, and the thing that took the old one was simply age, arriving on its own schedule, the ordinary quiet seminary death the species had spent 400 cycles making the only kind of death there was. Sethais sat with the architect through the last of it, In the clean, bright light of the medical bay, they were only just then learning to call a medical bay. And they talked, because Vess wanted to talk, and Sethais had learned to be present at terrible places. "You will keep the names," Vess said. It was not a question. "I will keep the names. Not just the dead, the other names too, the classification. The kinetic record, the whole shape of what she did, so that when the Directorate has had 100 cycles to be embarrassed by it and wants to sand it down into a triumph of summary science, there is a record that says otherwise in a hand they cannot edit." The old mantle had gone thin and pale, the color of the very end, but the 4 eyes were clear. "They will try. Institutions cannot bear to have been saved by the thing they despised. It offends them more than being beaten. Being beaten they can avenge. Being saved they can only resent, and resentment writes bad history. You will hold the good history against it. That is your work now. It is a physician's work, though we have no word for physician anymore, and you will have to build the word back, along with the discipline, along with everything else we threw away." "I do not know how to build a discipline," Sethais said. "I am a provisional analyst. I recalibrate assays. "You are the only Semari alive who watched an immune system work up close for 20 days and understood what he was seeing," Vess said. "That is more medicine than our entire species has held in an age. You will build it out of that. You will build it slowly and badly at first, the way everything is built at first, and you will make errors, and some of them will cost, because that is what a young discipline costs. But you will build it, because we can no longer afford not to have it." She showed us that. She showed us that a people with no defenses is not a safe people. It is only a people who have not yet met the right weapon. We met it. We survived it barely on the charity of the thing we built it to kill. We will not always be so lucky, and the next luck will have to be a discipline, not a captive. The architect's breathing had gone shallow. "That is the last thing I built, Sethais, not the weapon. You. I spent a lifetime on the weapon and 40 days on you, and you are the better piece of work, and it is not close." Sethais had no answer to that, and Vess did not seem to want one. And after a while the architect's breathing slowed and eased and stopped, quietly, without a fever, without a storm, the ordinary quiet death, and Sethais sat with the body in the bright clean light, and then he got up and wrote the name in the log, Vess, physician-architect of the house he never used, at the top of a new list, the list of the ones the weapon did not take, and he understood that this list, too, was a kind of name-keeping, and that he would be doing it for the rest of his life. He built the discipline. It took him the rest of his life, as Vess had said, and it was slow and it was bad at first, and some of the errors cost. And none of that is the part of the story that matters here, except to say that 100 cycles later there were Semari physicians again, for the first time in an age, and they were trained in a discipline that Sethais had built out of 20 days at a containment glass. And the first thing every one of them learned, before any technique, before any assay, was the history. The true history, the good history, held in a hand the Directorate had never managed to edit. Of the 40 worlds the program had killed, and the 41st host that had not died, and the 7 dead of Seshkarn, and the dead of Oru Reach, and the small heavy world the couriers had come from and gone back to. They learned it because Sethais made them learn it, and Sethais made them learn it because Vess had told him to, and because he had come to believe, in the long clean cycles of building the thing, that a species which forgot how it had been saved would eventually decide it had saved itself, and a species which believed it had saved itself would, sooner or later, build another weapon and put it in another captive. And there would not always be a Wren Calder in the cell to build the door before she built the grave. He kept the cell. That was a thing he did that no one asked him to do and no one quite understood, and he never fully explained it. But when the array was refitted decades on, and the old containment tier was slated to be stripped and repurposed, Sethais used what authority he had by then accumulated to preserve one cell, the cell, Umber-94's cell, the one with the cradle bolted to the floor, exactly as it had been, and he brought the new physicians there at the end of their training. And he stood them in the gallery on the other side of the glass, where he had stood, and where Dra had stood, and where the whole certain apparatus of a species that could not be sick had stood watching a small dirty biped and waiting for her to die. And he told them to look at the cell, and to understand that the most dangerous thing that had ever been on the station had sat in that cell, small and quiet and unarmed, and that his species had looked at it and seen an animal, and had put its strongest weapon into it to watch it die, and had been wrong, in the specific way that the strong are always wrong about the quiet, and that 7 of their own were dead, and a hub had nearly died, and the whole clean, careful species had come within 1 week's dose of ending, because it could not tell the difference between a thing that made no noise and a thing that was no threat. She never raised her voice, ScienceFiction would tell them, the last thing every time at the glass. Not once in 20 days, with our strongest weapon in her body and our overseer promising to grind her into the next one. She asked for water. She asked what she was carrying. She told us the truth when we could not tell it to ourselves. And when it came time to save us, she did it flatly on her feet, without a threat and without a speech, the way she did everything. Because where she came from, the thing that kills you is never the thing you can shout at, and she had known that since before she could remember, and we had never learned it at all. He would let them stand with it. We were the loudest species in the catalog. We had abolished death and built the perfect weapon and graded 40 worlds by how they lost to us. And the whole time, the thing that would decide whether we lived was sitting in a cell we built, staying quiet, getting to work. Remember which one of us turned out to be dangerous. Remember it every time you are the biggest thing in a room and something small in the corner declines to be afraid of you.